Hello, I'm Margaret Walker, and I'm the speech therapist who designed the Makaton language program over 40 years ago. Little did I think then that it would become so widely known and used all over the UK by children and adults with severe communication and learning disability. At home, in schools and colleges, in the community and at work. Nor that it would be adapted for use in over 40 other countries as different as Kuwait, Japan, France and India. How did I come up with the idea of Makaton? In 1968, I started working in a large hospital in the south of England, Botley's Park. It wasn't a hospital for people who were medically sick, though the 1,100 children and adults who lived their entire lives there were called patients. It was a huge institution for children and adults with learning disabilities. Expectations that these patients could benefit from education and social opportunities were very low. The staff only communicated with the patients with speech, so many patients could not even express their thoughts and feelings, which led to frustration. This was vividly brought home to me one day when one of the patients I was working with suddenly grabbed my arm and bit it. I decided to assess all 1,100 patients to gain a better understanding of their communication problems. This hadn't been done before. I found that 60% of them had severe communication problems and half had little or no speech. Some had additional problems such as hearing or visual impairments, physical disability or autism. As a speech therapy student, I'd used British Sign Language, BSL, when I worked with profoundly deaf school children, so I knew how iconic and explicit many of the basic signs were for everyday life experiences. I wondered if adding signs from BSL for just the key words in speech might help the patient's understanding. For example, do you want a drink? I'm only signing the key words you and drink. I needed to compile a vocabulary of signs that would reflect the patient's daily lives. I spent 6 months recording the staff speaking to the patients and the patient's attempts to respond. I ended up with thousands of pages of results, but derived a surprisingly small vocabulary of around 350 concepts, ranging from simple ones like you, me, eat, sleep, good and bad, to more difficult ones like to think, to understand, why, because. Linguists confirmed that within every spoken language there is a smaller basic vocabulary of essential concepts that is called a threshold or core vocabulary. It seemed that unintentionally I had produced the Botley's Park threshold core vocabulary, and this later became known as the Makaton core vocabulary. As no one had tried key signing with speech before with these patients, I needed to know if they could actually learn signs and how many, and would they also use the signs as a means to communicate with others. My research evaluation began in 1972 and lasted 9 months. I found that the patients could learn the signs. Half the group learnt 90% of them, and even those with the lowest scores learnt 60%. I also found that some were attempting to use signs themselves. Most noticeable was that all the patients became more alert, attentive and sociable. And to our surprise, 3 patients began to attempt speech, something we'd never expected. Soon after this, I repeated the same evaluation with school children, aged 3 to 7 years. They all had similar disabilities to the adults. The main difference was that they were living at home in the community, not in an institution. The results showed similar positive outcomes, but some extra vocabulary was needed to cover community life. So I enlarged the core vocabulary to 400 concepts and called it Makaton. It's simply made up from my name, Margaret, M-A, Kathy, K-A, and Tony, T-O-N. Tony and Kathy were 2 workers with the deaf who were invited to come to Botley's Park to teach us signs from BSL. In those days it was pronounced Makaton, but now people tend to say Makaton. And as if to confirm that Makaton has entered into mainstream society, the name Makaton entered into the Oxford English Dictionary. In 1976, I held the very first Makaton Beginners Workshop for 40 people. This is the booklet of signs we used. The workshop was an instant success and more quickly followed. To respond to this growing interest all over the UK, I established and led a charitable trust. It was originally called the Makaton Vocabulary Development Project, MVDP, which later became the Makaton Charity. Following our initial success with signing, we noticed that there were some patients with severe physical disability who were unable to make the signs clearly to express themselves. What they needed was a symbol system to match the words and signs in the core vocabulary. This was another huge task. It took us about 5 years to research and design symbols for grammatical elements such as nouns, verbs, and prepositions, etc. Now, Makaton symbols like signs are an integral part of the Makaton language program. Thankfully, in the 70s and 80s, as attitudes changed, institutions like Botley's Park were closing. The patients were recognised as children and adults entitled to live normal lives in the community like the rest of us. With the help of others, we produced a large resource vocabulary of additional signs and symbols arranged in topics which could be used with the core vocabulary. And currently there are over 7,500 concepts in the Makaton resource vocabulary. Also, professionals working in mainstream education and training began to see the potential of using Makaton signs and symbols for the development of literacy and numeracy skills. The creation of Makaton has been the most incredible experience. It has been very challenging, but also so rewarding to see how it can change the lives of users, their families, carers, and professionals. And it's been fascinating to see how others have expanded on my work in ways I would never have imagined, with new exciting resources as different as signing for babies, our own Makaton nursery rhymes video, and the BBC's award-winning children's TV series with Makaton signs and symbols. I've also been privileged to have worked with professionals in many different countries, adapting the British version of the Makaton programme to suit different cultures and providing essential training. Now, tens of thousands of people have been trained to use the Makaton language programme through our network of tutors. And finally, I am grateful to the many committed and interested people who share the same hopes as I have to improve the lives and opportunities of those with disabilities all over the world. Thank you all.